All right, hey there, students. I couldn't hardly wait any longer to find out what happens to Tristram and Isoude. So today I'm going to be continuing that story. This is chapter 13, Tristram and Isoude, continued. After this affair, Tristram was banished from the kingdom, and Isoude shut up in a tower, which stood on the bank of a river. Tristram could not resolve to depart without some further communication with his beloved, so he concealed himself in the forest till at last he contrived to attract her attention by means of twigs which he curiously peeled and sent down the stream under her window. By this means many secret interviews were obtained. Tristram dwelt in the forest, sustaining himself by game, which the dog Houdain ran down for him. For this faithful animal was unequaled in the chase, and knew so well his master's wish for concealment that, in the pursuit of his game, he never barked. At length Tristram departed, but left Houdain with Isoude, as a remembrancer of him. Sir Tristram wandered through various countries, achieving the most perilous enterprises, and covering himself with glory, yet unhappy in the separation from his beloved Isoude. At length King Mark's territory was invaded by a neighboring chieftain, and he was forced to summon his nephew to his aid. Tristram obeyed the call, put himself at the head of his uncle's vassals, and drove the enemy out of the country. Mark was full of gratitude, and Tristram, restored to favor and to the society of his beloved Isoude, seemed at the summit of happiness. But a sad reverse was at hand. Tristram had brought with him a friend named Feridun, son of the king of Brittany. This young knight saw Queen Isoude and could not resist her charms. Knowing the love of his friend for the queen, and that the love was returned, Feridun concealed his own until his health failed, and he feared he was drawing near his end. He then wrote to the beautiful queen that he was dying for love of her. The gentle Isoude, in a moment of pity for the friend of Tristram, returned him an answer so kind and so compassionate that in return it restored him to life. A few days afterwards Tristram found this letter. The most terrible jealousy took possession of his soul. He would have slain Feridun, who with difficulty made his escape. Then Tristram mounted his horse and rode to the forest, where for 10 days he took no rest nor food. At length he was found by a damsel, lying almost dead by the brink of a fountain. She recognized him, and tried in vain to rouse his attention. At last, recollecting his love for music, she went and got her harp, and played thereon. Tristram was roused from his reverie. Tears flowed. He breathed more freely. He took the harp from the maiden, and sung this lay, with a voice broken with sobs. Sweet I sang in former days, kind love perfected my lays. Now my art alone displays the woe that on my being preys. Charming love, delicious power, worshipped from my earliest hour, thou who life on all dost shower, love, my life, thou dost devour. In death's hour I beg of thee, Isoude, dearest enemy, thou who erst could kinder be, when I'm gone forget not me. On my gravestone passers by oft will read as low I lie, never wight in love could vie with Tristram, yet she let him die. Tristram, having finished his lay, wrote it off and gave it to the damsel, conjuring to her to present it to the queen. Meanwhile, Queen Isoude was inconsolable at the absence of Tristram. She discovered that it was caused by the fatal letter which she had written to Feridun. Innocent, but in despair at the sad effects of her letter, she wrote another to Ferredin, charging him never to see her again. The unhappy lover obeyed this cruel decree. He plunged into the forest and died of grief and love in a hermit's cell. Isoude passed her days in lamenting the absence and unknown fate of Tristram. One day, her jealous husband, having entered her chamber unperceived, overheard her singing the following lay. My voice is piteous wail is bent, my harp to notes of languish meant. Ah, love, delightsome days be meant, for happier wights with heart's content. Ah, Tristram, far away from me, art thou from restless anguish free? Ah, couldst thou so one moment be from her who so much loveth thee? The king, hearing these words, burst forth in a rage, but Isoude was too wretched to fear his violence. You have heard me, she said. I confess it all. I love Tristram, and always shall love him. Without doubt he is dead and died for me. I no longer wish to live. The blow that shall finish my misery will be most welcome. The king was moved at the distress of the fair Isoude, and perhaps the idea of Tristram's death tended to allay his wrath. He left the queen in charge of her women, commanding them to take especial care lest her despair should lead her to do harm to herself. Tristram, meanwhile, distracted as he was, rendered a most important service to the shepherds by slaying a gigantic robber named Tullus, who was in the habit of plundering their flocks and rifling their cottages. The shepherds, in their gratitude to Tristram, bore him in triumph to King Mark, to have him bestow on him a suitable reward. No wonder Mark failed to recognize in the half-clad wild man before him his nephew Tristram, but grateful for the service the unknown had rendered, he ordered him to be well taken care of, and gave him in charge to the queen and her women. Under such care, Tristram rapidly recovered his serenity and his health, so that the romancer tells us he became handsomer than ever. King Mark's jealousy revived with zest and desire to hear some news of her lover. She wrote a letter and sent it. Did I skip a page? Yes, I did. Okay. King Mark's jealousy revived with Tristram's health and good looks, and in spite of his debt of gratitude, so lately increased, he again banished him from court. Sir Tristram left Cornwall and proceeded into the land of Loegria, England, in quest of adventures. One day he entered a wide forest. The sound of a little bell showed him that some inhabitant was near. He followed the sound and found a hermit who informed him that he was in the forest of Arnantes, belonging to the fairy Viviane, the Lady of the Lake, who, smitten with love for King Arthur, had found means to entice him to this forest, where by enchantment she held him a prisoner, having deprived him of all memory of who and what he was. The hermit informed him that all the knights of the Round Table were out in search of the king, and that he, Tristram, was now in the scene of the most grand and important of adventures. This was enough to animate Tristram in the search. He had not wandered far before he encountered a knight of Arthur's court, who proved to be Sir Kay, the seneschal, who demanded of him whence he came. Tristram, answering, "From Cornwall," Sir Kay did not let slip the opportunity of a joke at the expense of the Cornish knight. Tristram chose to leave him in this error, and even confirmed him in it. For meeting some other knights, Tristram declined to jest with them. They spent the night together at an abbey, where Tristram submitted patiently to all of their jokes. The seneschal gave the word to his companions that they should set out early next day, and intercept the Cornish knight on his way, and enjoy the amusement of seeing his fright when they should insist on running a tilt with him. Tristram, next morning, himself alone, he put on his armor and set out to continue his quest. He soon saw before him the seneschal, and the 3 knights who barred the way, and insisted on a joust. Tristram excused himself a long time. At last he reluctantly took his stand. He encountered them one after the other, and overthrew them all 4, man and horse, and then rode off, bidding them not to forget their friend, the Knight of Cornwall. Real quick, a note. In this story, jousts are referred to as a just. So on a just, when he takes on the other knights in a just, they are jousting. Tristram had not ridden far when he met a damsel who cried out, "Ah, my lord, hasten forward and prevent a horrid treason." Tristram flew to her assistance and soon reached a spot where he beheld a knight, whom 3 others had borne to the ground and were unlacing his helmet in order to cut off his head. Tristram flew to the rescue and slew with one stroke of his lance one of the assailants. The knights, recovering his feet, sacrificed another to his vengeance, and the 3rd made his escape. The rescued knight then raised the visor of his helmet, and a long white beard fell down upon his breast. The majesty and venerable air of this knight made Tristram suspect that it was none other than Arthur himself, and the prince confirmed his conjecture. Tristram would have knelt before him, but Arthur received him in his arms, and inquired his name and country, but Tristram declined to disclose them, on the plea that he was now on a quest requiring secrecy. At this moment the damsel who had brought Tristram to the rescue darted forward, and seizing the king's hand, drew from his finger a ring, the gift of the fairy, and by that act dissolved the enchantment. Arthur, having recovered his reason and his memory, offered to Tristram to attach him to his court and to confer honors and dignities upon him. But Tristram declined all, and only consented to accompany him till he should see him safe in the lands of his knights. Soon after, Hector de Maris rode up and saluted the king, who on his part introduced him to Tristram as one of the bravest of his knights. Tristram took leave of the king and his faithful follower, and continued his quest. We cannot allow Tristram through all the adventures which filled this epoch of his history. Suffice it to say, he fulfilled on all occasions the duty of a true knight, rescuing the oppressed, redressing wrongs, abolishing evil customs, and suppressing injustice, thus by constant action endeavoring to lighten the pains of absence from her he loved. In the meantime, Isoude, separated from her dear Tristram, passed her days in languor and regret. At length she could no longer resist the desire to hear some news of her lover. She wrote a letter and sent it by one of her damsels, niece of her faithful Brengwain. One day, Tristram, weary with his exertions, had dismounted and laid himself down by the side of a fountain, and fallen asleep. The damsel of Queen Isoude arrived at the same fountain, and recognized Passebrul, a horse of Tristram, and presently perceived his master asleep. He was thin and pale, showing evident marks of the pain he suffered in separation from his beloved. She awakened him, and gave him the letter which she bore, and Tristram enjoyed the pleasure so sweet to a lover of hearing from and talking about the object of his affections. He prayed the damsel to postpone her return till after the magnificent tournament, which Arthur had proclaimed should have taken place, and conducted her to the castle of Persides, a brave and loyal knight, who received her with great consideration. Tristram conducted the damsel of Queen Isoude to the tournament, and had her placed in the balcony among the ladies of the queen. He glanced and saw the stately galleries, dame, damsel, each through worship of their queen, white-robed in honor of the stainless child, and some with scattered jewels like a blank of maiden snow mingled with sparks of fire. He looked but once, and veiled his eyes again. That was an excerpt from the last tournament. He then joined the tourney. Nothing could exceed his strength and valor. Lancelot admired him, and by a secret presentiment declined to dispute the honor of the day with a knight so gallant and so skillful. Arthur descended from the balcony to greet the conqueror, but the modest and devoted Tristram, content with having borne off the prize in the sight of the messenger of Isoude, made his escape with her, and disappeared. The next day the tourney recommenced. Tristram assumed different armor, that he might not be known, but he was soon detected by the terrible blows that he gave. Arthur and Guinevere had no doubt that it was the same knight who had borne off the prize of the day before. Arthur's gallant spirit was roused. After Lancelot of the Lake and Sir Gawain, he was accounted the best knight of the Round Table. He went privately and armed himself, and came into the tourney in undistinguished armor. He ran a just with Tristram, whom he took in his seat, but Tristram, who did not know him, threw him out of the saddle. Arthur recovered himself, and content with having been made proof of the stranger knight, bade Lancelot finish the adventure and vindicate the honor of the Round Table. Sir Lancelot, at the bidding of the monarch, assailed Tristram, whose lance was already broken in former encounters. But the law of this sort of combat was that the knight, after having broken his first lance, must fight with his sword, and must not refuse to meet with his shield the lance of his antagonist. Tristram met Lancelot's charge upon his shield, which that terrible lance could not fail to pierce. It inflicted a wound upon Tristram's side, and, breaking, left the iron in the wound. But Tristram, also with his sword, smote so vigorously on Lancelot's casque that he cleft it, and wounded his head. The wound was not deep, but the blood flowed into his eyes and blinded him for a moment, and Tristram, who thought himself mortally wounded, retired from the field. Lancelot declared to the king that he had never received such a blow in his life before. Tristram hastened to Gouvernail, his squire, who drew forth the iron, bound up the wound, and gave him immediate ease. Tristram, after the tournament, kept retired to his tent. But Arthur, with the consent of all the knights of the Round Table, decreed him the honors of the second day. But it was no longer a secret that the victor of the 2 days was the same individual, and Gouvernail, being questioned, confirmed the suspicions of Lancelot and Arthur, that it was none other than Sir Tristram of Lyonesse, the nephew of the King of Cornwall. King Arthur, who desired to reward his distinguished valor, and knew that his uncle Mark had ungratefully banished him, would have eagerly availed himself the opportunity to attach Tristram to his court. All the knights of the Round Table declaring with acclamation that it would be impossible to find a more worthy companion. But Tristram had already departed in search of adventures, and the damsel of Queen Isoude returned to her mistress. All right. The adventure of Sir Tristram is in fact going to be continued in the next chapter, and I will try to read that for you all tomorrow. Okay. Students, I'm really enjoying the tale of Tristram and Isoude. Very fun in how it crosses over with this one of the most well-known stories of King Arthur, which is King Arthur and the Lady of the Lake. That is an absolute classic. Yeah, it's just great fun so far. So I look forward to possibly concluding it tomorrow with all of you guys. Okay, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay in the pursuit of knowledge. Goodbye, students.